Hi everyone, and thank you all for joining. My name is Kristen Brown. I'm with the Ironside. I'm the Marketing and Events Manager here. I'm just going to take a quick few minutes and introduce my team and a quick overview of the company and of today's webinar. So right now you're going to be listening to the TM1 Performance Modeler and Architect comparison for advanced users. Jerry Haig, who is our TM1 technical lead, and Wes Wiss, our senior consultant for performance management, will both be delivering today's presentation and demo. You can join today's discussion on Twitter, hashtag IBMTM1 if you want to join in a live discussion. Also, in your chat panel, you can type in any questions as the webinar goes along. We are going to hold all questions until the end of the webinar, so anything that comes up, just chat them, and I'll keep a log of all the questions, and at the end of the webinar, we'll go through them with Wes and Jerry. Just some upcoming events we have going on at Ironside. The next couple of weeks, we have another webinar. Feel free to forward it along to those on your SPSS team. That's going to be June 17th, which is next Tuesday. Also, just some upcoming training that you guys might find interested. You can visit our website for all of these events and future events as well. Just a quick overview of Ironside. We were founded in 1999. We are an award-winning business partner of IBM. We have 100 US-based full-time employees across Boston, New York, Detroit, Atlanta, Philly, and Austin, and we have global clients in the US, Europe, Asia, and Bermuda. Just a quick 360 degrees of analytics. These are our current capabilities. I'm not going to go through these, through a deep dive of these, but these are just our capabilities, and any questions you have regarding this, our website is packed full of information. So now I'm just going to hand this over to Jerry Haig, and he's going to discuss the previous webinar we had last month on an intro to Performance Modeler. Jerry?
Great, thank you, Kristen. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. So as Kristen mentioned, just to get started, this is the second part of a previous webinar we did, which was more of an introduction to Performance Modeler. If you weren't attending that one, that's okay. It's available on YouTube. You can search for it. Just search Ironside TM1, and I believe it's the first record that'll come up. And it's not critical if you missed that one. This is a little bit deeper dive into the technical capabilities of Performance Modeler, how to use it with Architect, and sort of the functionality that is available in each tools, and how you can use both of them or pick one in your environment. Some of the things we covered in the prior webinar are what is Performance Modeler. So we did a high-level overview of sort of what it is, some of the benefits of why you would use Performance Modeler. We went over the folder structure. One of the nice features of Performance Modeler is it allows you to group your development items within a sort of standard folder structure, which is really nice if you have multiple developers, so you don't step on each other. I can separate it. This is where I'm developing my sales system. Here I'm developing a personnel reporting system, and I can group those together however I want. And then we also did 3 live demos. We did one of building a dimension in Architect and in Performance Modeler, so you can sort of see the difference of what it looks like. We did the same thing with a cube, so you can see how you assemble a cube in each of the different tools. And then we also showed bringing up an existing model in Performance Modeler. So maybe some of you may have TM1 cubes already built and are considering adding Performance Modeler on top of that as another interface to work with your data, what that looks like. And we're going to talk about that in more detail later on in this session, so you have some ideas of what you can and can't do there. We got some questions following the webinar that I wanted to share with the broader group so you have an idea what people were asking. One of the questions was, can you have multiple time dimensions? So Performance Modeler introduces the concept of where you define a type of a dimension. And one of the types is time. So the question is, can you have multiple times? different time dimensions, and yes, you can. So one of the nice features is Performance Modeler will generate a time hierarchy for you. So you can set it at year, quarter, month, week, or day. Okay? So I can have multiple time dimensions that input the data at different levels. So I could have a monthly P&L cube where the data is a monthly balance, and then I could also have a daily sales cube where the data is stored by day, which roll up to the months. And what's nice about that is, doing it that way, I can then use Performance Modeler's link function to move the data across the two cubes at their corresponding roll-up level. So in the days will roll up to the months, to a monthly total. I can then move that total to my monthly cube. And then I can have a drill through that will drill me back to my other cube that supports the daily detail. Second question, everything you can do in Architect can be done in Performance Modeler. Mostly, not totally. And one of the purposes of this session is to go over what can be done in each tool. From a development standpoint, all the cubes, the dimensions, process, everything you can create is the same in both tools. You can write rules the same, you can create processes the same. But there are some specific functionality that is only available in each interface. And we'll talk about what those functions are and then how you can maybe access just the functions you need in the other tool. Are there any size limitations as far as cubes, dimensions, etc.? Not in Performance Modeler and not really in TM1. For years, TM1 has been limited to 256 dimensions in the cube. Recently, they lifted that limitation. Prior to that, it was 16 dimensions. There is no limit to the number of elements you can have in a dimension. However, there are some practical limits of what makes a functional, usable application. Realistically, I have no idea why you would want to have a cube with more than 256 dimensions. Even more than 10 can get unwieldy. So there are no functional limitations, but there are some practical limits of what makes a usable environment. But essentially, the application will support it if you deem it necessary and you can work with it. Last question, what percentage of implementations are using Performance Modeler versus what are using Architect? So it depends. So almost all new applications, so someone just purchased TM1 and is building something from scratch, are using Performance Modeler in some capacity. And I would say more than half are using it as their primary development environment. As far as existing legacy TM1 customers, there is some apprehension there. It's new. Change is always scary. That being said, most of those people that have been introduced to it are at least using some of the functionality. Now, they may be doing more of their development in Architect because that's what they're familiar with, but they are using Performance Modeler in some capacity. So pretty much everyone who's seen Performance Modeler and has it up and running is using it to some degree. The question is, how much are they using it? Is it going to be their primary development environment? And part of that just depends on what you're comfortable with. So some people who have more of a systems background may prefer just writing the code manually by themselves. Someone who's more from finance who just knows what the data should look like. I know the data needs to flow from this cube to this cube at this line to this line. Performance Modeler is a great interface for them because they can just build those connections and go from there, and it'll generate the code for them, and they don't really need to worry about it. So it kind of depends on where you're coming from. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover migrating to TM1 Performance Modeler. What do you need to know? So I have an application. I want to pull it up in PM. What's going to happen? How should I work? If I want to make updates, how will that all flow? What features only exist in Architect, and what features only exist in Performance Modeler? Like I said, there are both. There are features that only exist in each other right now. That could change next release, but that's how it is as of today. We're going to do a live demo of one of the features that is exclusive to Performance Modeler, and that's the transfer process. So if you're a legacy TM1 user, you know moving data from dev to prod has been kind of a pain point for TM1 in that you had to physically shut down prod, copy the files over, and restart the server. Well, if I have a global application, that's not really a practical solution. Now Performance Modeler introduces the capacity to actually move data from one server to another with the server still up and running. So I can make some changes in dev, get user sign-off, and then move them to prod without bringing the server down. And the last topic is, so if you're going to go to Performance Modeler, you probably want to go to the latest version. So the latest version right now is TM1 10.2.2. TM1 10.2, I believe, introduced the Java web component, which, if you haven't seen it, is great for performance. So we've noticed a substantial improvement from going to Java. However, there are some issues with how web sheets work. There's some things that work slightly differently in the Java version. So we're going to take you through some of the things that we've seen and how to sort of work around that. So migrating to TM1 Performance Modeler, what do I need to know? So the first thing is you really want to pick a primary development environment. Like I said earlier, you can use both tools, and unless you're extremely experienced with each, it's going to behoove you to pick one tool as the primary development interface and maybe only access the other for the specific functionality you want. It is possible to write and do development in both, but you're probably going to run into some conflicts. You're probably going to get a little confused. It's really not recommended. So you really want to pick one and kind of stick with that. Like I said, you could develop in Architect, and then if you have an existing application, and then say, I just want to use the PM functions that are available in it exclusively. So, for example, is the ability to add or remove dimensions from a cube. So within Performance Modeler, I can now change an existing cube structure. I can add or remove dimensions. And to me, this is huge. You know, we oftentimes before Performance Modeler, we would build placeholder dimensions for things people might use in the future. So you might be selling a product in a foreign currency in the next 3 years, so you'll build a currency dimension in your cube even though you know you're not going to use it for years. Now you have the ability to add that dimension to an existing cube and keep all of your data. Potentially keeping your rules, although it depends how you have them built. If you actually built them in Performance Modeler, it will update them. If you built them manually, it will not. And then some of the migration tools, and that's that transfer process we're going to talk about later. So it's possible to just use Performance Modeler just to access that functionality. Other items to be aware of, all your existing cubes, dimensions, rules, processes, all that will display automatically in Performance Modeler. So if I have an extensive application that I've already built, when I open Performance Modeler tomorrow, all those items will be displayed. They'll all be accessible. What you don't want to do is create processes or rules in Performance Modeler and then try to update them in Architect. You can do it. It will save, but what you'll find is it may not save back to Performance Modeler or save the way you would like it to be. And oftentimes, when you develop it through Performance Modeler, the code doesn't look exactly like you'd expect it if you built it yourself manually. For example, if I create a TI process that builds a dimension, it will list all the code on the Data tab, where you'd probably expect to see it on the Metadata tab. So you don't want to go in there and edit in Architect. Now, I can create different processes in Architect and different processes in Performance Modeler and keep them separate, and I'll be okay, but don't mix and match them. If you wish to update rules, existing rules in Performance Modeler, either recreate them or copy and paste them in the Performance Modeler. So in theory, you can update manually created rules in Performance Modeler. They will display and work fine. We recommend just actually, though, pasting them, building them in Performance Modeler. So taking them from the Rule Editor Architect and pasting them into Performance Modeler and editing it from there. We've run into some issues in the past where editing in Performance Modeler doesn't always propagate back to Architect the way you would expect. So there is some risk there. you cannot auto-generate feeders for manually created rules. So one of the nice features of Performance Modeler is it will automatically generate feeders. It will not do that for rules that you created on your own as of today. Now, that could change in a new release, but I think that would be challenging to code, but so you still have to write your own feeders. And then do not update or modify links from Architect. So one of the nice features of Performance Modeler is you now have the ability to link data across cubes. This is kind of similar to how it was done in Cognos EP. If some of you are familiar with that, I basically have two cubes. I draw a connection between the two of how I want to link data. It builds that linkage via a rule or a process. It's a really nice feature. It will also create the drill-through logic for you automatically just by saying enable drill-through, which to me is huge. Now you have the ability to create a summary P&L cube that maybe gathers data from a bunch of detail cubes. You can just build links for that in PM and then have it automatically create the drill-throughs to go back to my detail cube. So I can go from my P&L, have all my drill-through logic to take me to the appropriate summary cube or detail cube based on the line I'm querying. What features are exclusive to Architect only? So these are things that are not currently accessible in Performance Modeler. So one is drill-throughs, which I just talked about. So, and this is interesting. So you can create a link, and it will build the drill-through for you. What you can't do is manually create your own drill-through or create a drill-through back to a relational data store. So say I have a data warehouse that has invoice detail or transactional level detail. I can't build a drill-through process and rules to that in Performance Modeler as of today. I can't use ODBO as a TI data source. That is currently not supported in Performance Modeler. Replication and synchronization. So if you have another server that you want to replicate or synchronize your data with, that functionality is not supported currently in Performance Modeler. Disconnecting individual users. So I want to drop some user from the server. I can't do that via PM. I also can't send a broadcast message to all TM1 users. Not a ton of people do this, but say I want to send out the message to everyone that's connected to TM1, which you can do via Architect. It says, I'm going to shut the server down in 15 minutes. PM does not support that functionality currently. Dynamic subsets, it doesn't have to support all the same functions that Architect does as of today. I suspect they'll be adding more in the future, but as of right now, you're limiting what you can do from a dynamic subset standpoint in PM. And there's also no ability to search the transaction log. So the server log is accessible, where I can see processes that have been run when the server came up, those items. But the actual transaction log, I want to search for every change Bob Jones made to the P&L last month. That is not available through Performance Modeler. So what is available only in Performance Modeler? So there are some features that are exclusive to Performance Modeler. Adding or removing a dimension from an existing cube. So I have a cube. I want to change my dimensional structure. I can do that in Performance Modeler, and it will keep the data. It will actually ask me what to do with the data if required. If I'm adding a dimension, it'll say, what elements do you want to put the data to? Do you want to spread it across the elements of the new dimension? Do you want to repeat it or put it in one element? To me, that's huge. It will also update any rules or links created within PM. It will not update your manually created rules. It will also not update any web sheets or Excel files that you have that are pulling from that cube. Links via process or rules with auto-generated feeders and drill-through. So I talked about this briefly earlier. Performance Modeler introduces the concept of being able to link data. So I can now link data between two cubes. I simply pull up my two cubes, and I draw an arrow of where I want the data to flow. It will write the rule or process that is required. It will also write the feeder for it if you do it via rule, which is huge. So a lot of people struggle with feeders. Now this generates it for you. You also have the ability to generate the feeder yourself if you feel that the feeder it's going to use isn't as efficient as you would like. It's possible doing it this way, it may slightly overfeed the cube. So you have the ability to write the feeder yourself if you know better. Guided imports. So when I'm creating a cube or creating a dimension, it now has a wizard that guides me through the process. And we saw a little bit of this in the prior webinar. Data flow diagrams. So, as part of every project that Ironside does, we do a flow chart of all the movements across the various cubes. So, here's my source data coming in, and then it moves to this, and cube, and it moves to this. Depending on your application, that can be fairly complicated. So Performance Modeler builds that for you itself automatically. So now it's readily available. Input into a consolidation or breakback, as it's called in Cognos EP. So this is sort of available in Architect. So via Architect, you can actually use the spread functions to input into a consolidation. However, in Performance Modeler, if I try to input values into a consolidation, it will prompt me with how I want to spread those values and what I want to do. So it's a little bit more intuitive interface of how to write to a consolidation. We talked about this briefly in the beginning about the prior webinar questions, the auto-generated time dimension. So Performance Modeler will generate a time dimension for you where I can sort of set my beginning and ending of time. So I can say, give me a time dimension of 2012 through 2020 by month with year-to-date roll-ups and quarters. What's great about this is it populates a bunch of attributes associated with time. So prior month, next month, ending period for the quarter, those types of things. Those are the things that we normally would build as part of a project, but you kind of have to do them yourselves, and it's kind of a pain to go through and build all those attributes for you. Build them all manually. So it does them all automatically. I just set the parameters for how I want time to work, and then it just creates it automatically. So that's a really nice feature that you can use. And the last one is the transfer in and out. So Wes is going to do a live demonstration of this for you, but this is a process that gives you the ability to move data back and forth across two different servers. So as I discussed earlier, these features can be accessed via either tool. So, I mean, not via either tool. You can access these features via one tool and then come back to the other one as your primary development environment. So I may say, I'm pretty comfortable with writing rules and processes and creating cubes in Architect, but I want to use some of these features exclusive to Performance Modeler. So I can do all my development in Architect and then come back to Performance Modeler and say, yeah, let me just build some links in here because I know that's quick and easy, and go from there. Or let me just use this transfer process to move data back and forth. Or I know I built this complex application. Now my boss is telling me we need to add another dimension to it. We acquired a company. We need to add a dimension. I have all these things already built. That's going to be a huge pain. I can just go into PM and add it, and then go back to my regular Architect development interface. So, I mean, that's kind of where we're at today with that. A lot of people are using both. As you can see, not every function is available in each. So there may be a lot of cases where you want to use one, you want to use a certain percentage of one tool versus a certain percentage of the other. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wes, who's going to take you through the transfer in and out process in detail.
Go ahead and pass it, Jerry.
I'm passing. There you go.
Okay. All right. So we'll go through and demo this transfer process, which is part of the new Performance Modeler. And this is really a great utility to use either if you're going to stay in Architect, as Jerry discussed earlier, or in Performance Modeler. It won't really affect the application, but what it does is it allows you to move TM1 objects, subsets, views, processes, dimensions, cubes, etc., between servers without having to reboot the server and disrupt the user community. What we'll do is we'll go over creating a shared container store for the transfer process. We'll transfer some processes out. We'll modify a transfer process, so we'll run it. Then we'll switch servers and we'll move to a production environment, and we'll bring in what we've deployed from development. I'll show you how you can modify that and change your mind and not bring certain things in, and then run that process. So for right now, I'm going to skip out of the PowerPoint here and move to Performance Modeler. So I'm in Performance Modeler, and I've logged on to my development server. The first thing that we're going to need to do is, by default, Performance Modeler sets your transfer processes to a private user directory. That doesn't allow you to share it across all the admins in your community. In order to do that, we'll need to add some new directories. All right? We go up to the new port, the star object here, and we're going to transfer a specification container store. We're going to create a new one, and we'll map out to the directory that we're going to create this in. What I've done, and I recommend this, is you would set this up on the source server, and I've set up a folder that's got transfer processes for my specifications and for my data. I want to select my specifications folder here, and now it's added to my options. Now to transfer a cube, it's fairly easy. We expand our cube objects, and we'll select the cube that we're going to deploy. In this example, I'm going to select the price and cost cube on Great Outdoors. Now, associated with the price and cost cube is a new dimension for my production server, as well as attribute cubes. We right-click on the cube object, and we transfer out. That's going to bring us to another folder selection where we want to put the data that we're transferring out. And we can map that out again in our database directory. I'd suggest this be, like I said, on the source server, someplace that's accessible by all admins, and I'm going to select my data folder. That's where I'm going to transfer this to. Now, Performance Modeler has automatically grabbed my attribute cubes as well. That's real nice and handy. It's going to add them to the new server. As far as the price cost cube goes, the action is it's going to add without data. We have many other options that we can do. We can add with data or without data. And unfortunately, it's showing up on my other screen. There we go. So we can add the data for a specific view or the data for the entire cube. We can add the data for a default view. Or if we have multiple cubes we're deploying, we can select and include the data for all the cubes, so we don't have to do this multiple times. I'm going to include the data for this cube. It's going to ask me if, again, are you sure you want to bring it? Yes, I do. All right. What it won't automatically grab when you select the cube is the views associated with the cube. So we can expand our cube object, go out to our price cost cube, and select the views that we want to bring in. By double-clicking, or we can use the arrows once we select it and bring in the source views. We can also bring in TI processes that are loading this, so we don't have to rebuild the load process. After we've created our transfer process, we'll need to save it. Okay, now the views you see adding without data, but we're bringing the data over for the cube. So we'll save the process. Now we have an option of where are we going to save it to. Like I said, the default is in your private directory. Well, we want to put it out in this shared environment so other TM1 admins can access this. This is handy because in some deployment environments, certain developers have access only to development, and then another area may be responsible for deploying to production. If it's in a shared directory, you both have access, both sides of the security team can take care of it. I'm going to give it another meaningful name here. Cap locks run. Now we can close the process and execute it. We'll execute it from the transfer process, right-click, and run. Complete. Now we'll move to our production environment and bring the data in. Now our transfer directories are accessible no matter what server we're logged onto. So here I'm on production, but I still have the same mappings towards my transfer directories. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a transfer in process from the model. We right-click on our server name, and we're going to transfer in. Where are we going to transfer it in from? We again have to map out to our directory on the source server and get our data. Now, Performance Modeler has read the available objects that are in that data folder for us to bring in. We can choose to remove subsets or choose to bring the cube in without the data or with the data. Okay, we're going to bring it in, include the data, and we're set. We're going to bring that in, so then we won't have to reload the process. Okay, if we want to remove one of the dimensions for fear of, say, corrupting something in production, a lot of times maybe your time dimension may need to be something that's controlled, so we could remove that. Everything else is still here for us to bring in. We're going to save our process now. Again, where do we want to save it? We're going to save it into our shared environment. Now we'll close the process and run it. It's brought the data in. As you can see, it brought in our new process, our cube, our new dimension. Performance Modeler brings the control objects in and knows where to put them in the folder structure. But as Jerry pointed out earlier, you can make your own folder structures here. So now you need to go and manually move this to where you want to keep it. We're going to keep our dimensions in our processes in the folders. We have to go and manually move them, move our cube object, and then move our dimension object to keep our organization. Okay. So that concludes the demo portion of the transfer process. Okay. So As we went over the capabilities of the process, provides for a seamless transfer of TM1 objects between servers without the need for a restart. It allows for the sharing of the transfer processes only with TM1 administrators. And it allows for the deployment of subsets, TIs, views, cubes, cube object data. Very handy utility to move objects from development to production without impacting the user community. I've seen servers that take up to 45 minutes or an hour to restart. I mean, that takes it away from the user community. And as an admin, if you're then in charge of deploying this in off hours, that could take into your time in the off hours as well. Now with this utility, we can move it in. Some of the limitations we have with the transfer process. It only automatically puts the control objects in the appropriate folder. As you saw, I had to do a little cleanup, moving my dimensions, cubes, and processes to the appropriate folders where I'm storing them. One thing also that's not supported by this is the transfer of rules. We'll have to resort to the rules editor and the import functionality on the rule in order to move the rule over with the cube. Other than that, it's a pretty powerful process, especially when we open it up to all the admins on our group. And as we talked about earlier, there are some issues in upgrading web applications that we've come across moving to 10.2. The Java environment is very powerful. It is less memory intensive than the old IIS and Excel services environment, which put a strain on the server and could slow things down. Some of the things that we've noticed in doing some upgrades is we have some utilities that are provided by IBM to upgrade your web sheets to the newer Excel 2007 or higher version. You need to use this conversion utility, which will upgrade the sheets to the higher version. It is recommended that you back these web pages up prior to the start of the conversion. There may be something you need to go back and get should the conversion corrupt the sheets. I haven't seen that yet, but safety first, back it up. There's also some issues that we've seen with active form formulas that may need to be updated. When you're generating an active form and slicing it out into Excel, some of the formulas are coming out a little differently, need a little cleanup in order to work. This all depends on how creative you've been with the prior deployment on your active web sheets. An example of some of the things that I've seen and done is, within the TM1 RGP row function, which is the function that allows for the expansion and contraction of the rows when different title elements are selected. I've seen a lot of embedded if statements and some DBRW functions that are referencing DBRW functions. This worked in the prior environments with Excel services. Although it was not recommended, in many cases, referencing a DBRW in a DBRW worked. In the Java environment, it doesn't work consistently. What you need to do is go back and look at the order of how your web sheet is getting constructed, remembering that DBRW formulas are retrieved in a batch mode from the server. DBR formulas are the first ones that are going to come back. So leverage that if you have any nesting going on within your active form. The first formula should get changed to DBRs that are inside an if statement, and then that will allow the RTP row formula to draw back the correct information. I've also seen areas where hard-coding the server name into the DBR formula is much more effective than cell referencing. Little things like this will help make your web sheets perform better on a rebuild when it opens. Another item that I've seen happen out there is in the way the RTP row formula is generated. In prior versions of 9.5, when you sliced that out and made an active form, it created the formula with the subset name that you had, and then in all the parameters, it had these double quote actions that followed, and then any cell referencing that you had. In the new version, 10.2, it's recommended that you remove those double quote sections and just leave the commas. Also, if you are referencing an MDX-generated area that's generating your subset, you'll need to remove the subset name from the formula as well. What happens, and by design now, is that MDX is applied to the subset. So if the objects that you're retrieving with your MDX code are not part of the subset that's listed, you want to get it removed. In prior versions, that worked. The MDX overrode the subset. In 10.2, they've tightened that up, and the MDX is applied to the subset that is retrieved. Again, how creative you get with your web sheets is really what defines what you have to go back in and look for. With TM1 now utilizing the Java environment, the inherent Excel functionality that was in the Excel services doesn't take over and override everything. So keep in mind, test them. When you convert, you'll need to maybe change some code, but the sheets will perform faster in the long run. Kristen, you ready to take it back?
Actually, if you can hold on to it, I'm just going to...
I will.
Thank you. So just a special offer for you guys, those who joined today's webinar. We are offering a complimentary one-day assessment. If you'd like to take advantage of this offer, you can contact Ray Haddad. His information is right on the screen. And after this webinar, we'll also follow up with a link to do a replay that you can listen to a replay or forward to anybody on your team who wasn't able to make it. We'll forward a link and a copy of the slide deck, and we'll also throw in there this assessment along with Ray's contact info. So a bunch of questions came through during the webinar, so we're going to just briefly go through those and have Wes and Jerry answer questions. And if you have any other questions over the next 10 or 15 minutes or as they come, just feel free to send them over and we'll go through them. So one of the first questions that came in were, Performance Modeler is a development tool, right? Is the breakback functionality available via Web Sheets contributor or exclusively in Performance Modeler?
Okay, I'll take that. So yes, Performance Modeler is a development tool, and the answer to are they available in the other tools is sort of. So TM1 Web, it does do breakback, although it automatically defaults to equal spread if you enter into consolidation through a cube view. Okay, it does not do it via if you were opening a web sheet, so something you developed in Excel and posted to the web. However, through the view interface or the web sheets, all your spread functions are available. So you could still write to a consolidation through the sort of the same method you would do in Architect and edit it that way. Be a contributor, I haven't tested it, so my guess is it probably reacts similar to the web because it's a very similar, the cube viewer interface. Where it just automatically does a equal spread across the children. I'm not in love with that as a default option, but that's how it works currently.
Are cube rules transferred with the cube, or do you have to select them like view?
No, you can't transfer cube rules with the view. That's the one object that's not available to be brought in. The best method is to revert to the rules editor and import the rule from your development environment.
Do both servers have to be on Performance Modeler to transfer the cubes?
Performance Modeler is the utility that you use to do the cube transfer. So that runs off of the web area on the local client. So I think I'm not sure if that's answering the question or not. I hope it is. But you can.
Well, so essentially, hold on. So essentially, you need to have both configured to Performance Modeler, and you can actually use Performance Modeler to connect to multiple servers, although you can do them in separate sessions. So you use Performance Modeler to create the export, and then you also need to use Performance Modeler to create the import. But they could be, or to do the import, but you could do them sort of in separate sessions.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you can bring the data. It doesn't necessarily have to be a one-way trip from development to production. If you want to use the transfer tool to refresh your development environment, you can do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, really, you could create the export file and send it to someone in China, and they could put your stuff up on their server.
Right.
You could also use it to send to IBM if you have a problem with how something's reacting. You can use the transfer process to create an export of your model for someone else to view. But they would need to use Performance Modeler to import it.
You guys good? Can I use Performance Modeler to write my rules but create my own feeders?
So I talked about that briefly in the beginning. The short answer is yes. So Performance Modeler sometimes overfeeds. So it doesn't have any business knowledge. So if your rule is, the rule is A equals B times C, and B is sparsely populated and C is densely populated, you would want to use B to feed A. Performance Modeler is not going to know that. So in many cases, people want to write their own feeders because Performance Modeler does have a tendency to overfeed. So whether it's a material difference or not, you kind of have to determine whether it makes sense to go the effort of writing your own feeders. But you can manually, you can have it write the rule and then you write the feeder, or you can see what feeder it generates, decide you don't like it, and then take it out and create your own. So that's another option. So Performance Modeler is, I liken it to using record macro function in like VBA. It'll create the logic, the code for you, and then you can sort of learn how that works. Now, similar to when you record a macro, though, it may record more stuff or generate more code than you would probably need if you wrote it yourself. So, if you ever record a simple function in Excel, you'll see that the macro is a ton of logic, whereas if you wrote it, it would be one line. So Performance Modeler works similar in that regard.
Thanks, Jerry. Can you connect to multiple servers via PM like you can in Architect using the file options and listing the servers separated by semicolons?
So yes, you can, but not quite the same way you do in options. So there's a separate configuration file where you can specify the different servers that you use. So I forget the exact path for the config file, but there's a Performance Modeler configuration file that you can update with multiple servers.
If I use PM to add a dimension to an existing cube, will it update my rules?
So it depends if you created them via Performance Modeler or not. So if you created them via Performance Modeler, yes. If you create them, created them yourselves manually, no.
Why do rules and TI processes created in PM look different than Architect?
So it's similar to what I talked about earlier with the VBA recording analogy. Is it's going to bring in a lot more stuff than you need. That's just how it works. So some of the stuff may be relevant to you, it may not, but it is going to look longer. So if you ever look at something generated via PM, if you ever look at the rule, actually the actual syntax, it is going to look different. It is going to have more verbiage than you're probably expecting, but that's okay. It still works, but that's just how the tool is set up.
All right, thanks, guys. We don't have any other questions that have come through, so we're ending here about 5 or 6 minutes early. But anybody on the call who has any questions as an afterthought, we'll send you all the contact information, and feel free to let us know if you have any outstanding questions. And if you'd like to take advantage of the special offer for today's attendees, please reach out to Ray, or he may be following up with you as well. But Jerry or Wes, if you guys don't have anything else to add, I'm just going to wrap this up and thank everybody for taking time out of their day to join us, and I hope you all have a great summer.
All right, great. Thank you.